Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Alliance's webinar series. My name is Christine Beck, and I am the Organizational Director of the Illinois Self-Advocacy Alliance, and I will be facilitating today's webinar. And today's webinar is Let's Learn About Supported Living. It's presented by Teresa Parks, who is the Deputy Director of Programs and the Human Rights Authority Director for the Illinois Guardianship and Advocacy Commission. Today is Tuesday, February 18th, 2020. The Alliance is proud to be an initiative of the Illinois Council on Developmental Disabilities. As a reminder, all attendees are in listen-only mode. If you wish to communicate with myself as the facilitator or Teresa as the presenter, type in your information, your question, comment, or contribution using the chat box on your control panel, and we will read that. There will be time at the end of the presentation for questions, comments, and considerations. There also be a couple polls during our time together to get you involved in this webinar. This webinar is being recorded and it will be placed on the Illinois Self-Advocacy Alliance's website when converted. Let's learn a little bit about the Alliance. The Alliance is a network of advocates and self-advocacy groups around Illinois. And the image on the screen is 15 people, some standing and some sitting, all holding white pieces of paper. And throughout our time together, we will be verbally describing the images that are on the screen in order to conform with the tenets of universal design. Our vision is for self-advocates to work together to get the support we need and to live the life we want in the community. Our mission is to speak up for ourselves and each other while working together to make changes in our communities and in Illinois. The Alliance's focus is on empowering people to speak up and speak out about what they want and need, and importantly, what they don't want and don't need, to action plan their goals, and to participate in advocacy at the personal, agency, community, and statewide levels. And what we do. The Alliance supports local groups. We work together on important issues. We offer networking, advocacy, and learning opportunities through monthly newsletters, through webinars, the Alliance Ambassador Leadership Program, and the Training Institute. And the image on the screen is a person with pink skin, short brown hair, wearing glasses, and holding papers. The Alliance is a network of self-advocates and self-advocacy groups all around Illinois. And the image on the screen is an outline of the shape of Illinois and stars on the map or on the state of Illinois that indicate where our current member groups are. So up in the northern part of the state, we are proud to have member groups in McHenry, Zion, Dixon, and Chicago and the surrounding areas. We have member groups in Alsop, Aurora, Brookfield, the city of Chicago, Chicago Heights, Elgin, Evanston, Evergreen Park, Hanover Park, Homewood, Mount Prospect, Rolling Meadows, and Westmont. In the central part of the state, we have member groups in Rock Island, Galesburg, Pontiac, Tremont, Bloomington, Beardstown, Jacksonville, Decatur, and Monticello. And in the southern part of Illinois, we have member groups in Alton, Edwardsville, Mattoon, Charleston, and Paris. As I like to say, no matter where you live, no matter where you work, or no matter where you play, chances are there's a self-advocacy group or self-advocate very near you. And so now I'd like you to meet the presenter, Teresa Parks. The image on the screen is a smiling woman with pink skin and shoulder-length blonde hair, and she is wearing a dark-colored shirt. So Teresa, take it away.
Thank you very much, Christine. Good morning, everyone. As Christine stated, my name is Teresa Parks, and I work for the Illinois Guardianship and Advocacy Commission. I'd like to start out and just give you a very quick overview of the Commission. We are a state agency, and we are dedicated to protecting the rights of persons with disabilities, and we do that through 3 distinct programs. Our largest program is the Office of State Guardian. We serve as guardian of last resort for adults with disabilities as appointed by the courts and when there's no one else willing and able to serve as guardian. We are guardian for more than 5,000 individuals across the state. We also provide educational materials about guardianship, the process, and we have a training manual training module for newly appointed guardians on our agency website. Our second program is the Legal Advocacy Service, and in that program, we provide legal advice and representation for people with disabilities. Most often, we are representing individuals with mental health needs who are facing involuntary mental health commitment or involuntary mental health treatment. Our attorneys represent those individuals to make sure that they get their day in court, their due process rights. The program I work most directly with is the Human Rights Authority, and we investigate allegations of rights violations committed against persons with disabilities by disability service providers. And we do this through a network of regional panels that include persons with disabilities and their family members. If you would like more information about any of our commission programs, my contact information is available at the end of this PowerPoint. The information I am providing with you today is just a basic overview of the concept of supported living. And this information originated from my involvement with Illinois Partners in Policy Making. This is an Illinois Council on Developmental Disabilities funded project, and that project provides intense education for persons with disabilities and their parents on all kinds of disability rights and issues on both the state and federal level. And I highly encourage you to check it out sometime. It's a wonderful experience. And in order to graduate from the program, each participant must complete a project. My project was on the concept of supported living. So what you're seeing today is directly from my Partners in Policy Making project. And as I'm sharing information with you, I would like you to keep in mind a particular word, and that word is possibilities. So let me start out with just giving you an overview of supported living, and I want to begin with a history lesson. I want us to look at past trends in serving people with disabilities residentially. This is based on some research conducted by Roger Stancliffe and Charles Lakin. They're 2 researchers in the field of disabilities, and they looked at how trends have changed over the years for people with disabilities. I think it's very important to look at this history, to look at how far we've come, but also to keep in mind that trends can change and they can improve. Lakin and Stancliffe identified 3 primary trends that have occurred over the course of 40 years, and this is on a national level, not just Illinois, nationally. The first trend was decreasing the use of larger facilities, institutions, state facilities, and increasing the use of community housing as residential supports for people with disabilities. Initially, the community housing was the larger group homes, for example, 16-bed facilities or more. Then a second trend came into being, and that was decreasing the size of those community residential settings or group homes, and many places decreased to 3 to 8 bed type facilities. The third trend is the one I want to focus on today is the concept of supported community living. And this occurs most often in even smaller settings of 3 or less individuals. One thing that the researchers noted that with each trend, each of these trends brought people with intellectual and developmental disabilities closer to the community and in smaller settings and produced better outcomes for people with disabilities. So what prompted these change in trends? How does a new trend begin? On a national level, how did things move beyond the way we've always done things? Well, Lakin and Stancliffe identified some very key things that happen. First of all, advocacy. Advocacy on the part of individuals with disabilities and their family members wanted something better or different. Secondly, legislation was key in promoting changes and trends. For example, the Americans with Disabilities Act and a court decision called Olmstead were two sources of change on a national level. And in both of those situations, the ADA and the Olmstead decision, they identified that segregating people with disabilities is the same as discrimination. The third thing that the researchers identified is that after each trend, a change in trend, there was research done on the impact on the lives of people with disabilities. And those research results showed that people who lived in community-based smaller settings had increased self-determination, deciding what they wanted to do. They had gains in skills, particularly functional skills. They had increased interaction with the community, and they had increased satisfaction with their services. Now, this research that I'm citing by Lakin and Stancliffe dates back to 2007. However, more recently, just in the past year, the ARC of the United States and the Council on Quality and Leadership conducted a housing study in 2019. And here you have a picture, a cover of the housing study featuring a smiling brown-skinned person and a pink-skinned person touching noses. There's also a direct link to the study that you can check out yourself. Let me tell you a little bit more about the study. As I said, it was conducted in 2019, and it involved interviews with more than 700 people with intellectual and developmental disabilities and their families. And they asked very specific questions. The first set of questions had to do, what choices did you have when you picked your current living arrangement? A second set of questions was, what do you expect to have in terms of choice with regard to future living arrangements? And the third question, what would be a dream home for you? So here are some of the results of that study. Only 55% of people with disabilities said that they were able to choose where to live, with whom they lived, and in what neighborhood or community. People who lived in host homes, their own homes or apartments, or with family had more choice in deciding their living arrangements. People who lived in institutions, group homes, or residential settings reported less choice in living arrangements. People who had more significant needs or had mental health as well as needs as a result of intellectual or developmental disabilities reported fewer community housing options. And for most people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, family chose where they lived. Some more research results having to do with decisions about future choices. Only 57% believe that they would be able to choose a new housing type. Only 51% believe that they would be able to choose a new neighborhood. 29% a new roommate. 24% a new room. And 18% believe that they would have no choice whatsoever. In terms of the types of living arrangements, the dream home, this is how people responded. Almost 80% indicated that they would want to live in their own homes or apartments. Only 10% would want to live with family. 5% in a group home. Only 3% on a campus for persons with intellectual and developmental disabilities. 2% in a host home. 1% in some other kind of setting, and 0% indicated that they would want to live in an institution. So here we have our first poll. Before we get into the nitty-gritty of supported living, I'd like to find out, what have you heard? Have you heard of supported living?
All right, so this is your opportunity to speak up and speak out. Go ahead and answer this poll. Have you heard of supported living? Yes or no? And both answers can be the right answers for you. It's okay. We just want to know, have you heard of supported living? And we're getting a lot of folks who are chiming in. Again, this is a poll that if you are joining us via your computer, you're able to participate in. Almost 80% of you have voted. I'll leave this open just a couple more seconds. All right. So we're going to go ahead and close this poll. It looks like the majority of you, 92% who responded, said, yes, we have heard of supported housing.
Wonderful. That is great to hear. And it's no surprise because actually it's been around for a very, very long time. In fact, there is a proponent, John O'Brien, supported, and that should be supported instead of supportive living proponent, who said in 1993, he offered the following definition for supported living. Supported living is when a person with a disability who requires long-term, publicly funded, organized assistance allies with an agency whose role is to arrange or provide whatever assistance is necessary for the person to live in a decent and secure home of one's own. So let's talk about some of the characteristics of supported living. And I want to offer up the following comment. The term supported and supportive living are sometimes used interchangeably, but for the purpose of this presentation, supported living will be based on these 5 characteristics identified in this slide. At the end of this PowerPoint, there is a link to another webinar that goes into more detail about supportive living. So the basic characteristics of supported living involve a home of one's own, choice and self-determination, relationships, community membership, flexible tailored services and support. So let's dig into each of these principles one at a time. First of all, a home of one's own. This would be a home that one would own, lease, or rent. It could be a house, it could be an apartment, it could be a condominium. The individual would have choice as to where, what community they would live in, and with whom, if anyone. The setting would be safe and secure. And this last point is really important. As the person's needs change and may even increase, supports change, but the person doesn't have to move. They can stay in the same setting and just rely on additional supports or less supports if that's needed. And there's a picture here on this slide of silver keys on a keychain shaped as a house. Secondly, a second principle is choice and self-determination or self-direction. And this is where the individual makes everyday decisions. They make their own future plans. They direct services. They actually choose the agency to provide the services, and they choose their own staff. And here's a picture on this slide of 3 blue arrows pointing in different directions with the word choices written in black. Also, with regard to choice and self-direction, supports are provided. For example, if someone has difficulty communicating what their choices or preferences would be, there would be supports put in place to help facilitate that person's choices and needs. And it might be technology or a communication device or some kind of behavioral support. And because people experience choice and self-direction, they're more satisfied with their services. And here you also have on this slide a picture of green street signs with arrows and the words "you" and "decide" written in white. That's what self-direction is all about. The third principle is relationships. People develop a circle of relationships with family, friends, and maybe neighbors in the community who provide supports informally, or maybe some are even paid to provide assistance. And the circle of support works together as a team with the agency that's providing services to share responsibilities for the individual's well-being. And there's a picture on this slide of words that represent relationships written in different colors, making the shape of a heart. And some of those words are respect, value, listen, caring, healthy. The fourth principle of supported living is community membership. This is where the individual fully engages in community life. They have access to the same things that anyone else does, access to clubs, groups, houses of worship, activities of interest, and the individual uses local community resources and generic services just like anyone else, such as the local dentist, the pharmacy, the bank, or a health club. And here you have on this slide a picture of hands of different colors all coming together to touch in the middle. The fifth and final principle of supported living is flexible, tailored services and supports. And this is accomplished through a person-centered planning process where every individual has an individualized service plan based on that person's wants, needs, and choices. Services are provided directly in that individual's home, apartment, or condo, and in the community that the person prefers. And this may even include up to 24-hour supports if needed. And I know of one example of a state where for individuals with very intense needs, they even have double staffed 24-hour supports for those very unique situations. The services would also include opportunities for people to continue to gain their skills, to increase their confidence, and quality of life. And on this slide, there's a picture of the words, "It's all about me," written in black on a background of blue and orange circles. And that's what this is all about. Supported living is all about the individual with the disability. John O'Brien, who identified these basic principles, also felt the need to clarify what supported living is not. And here are some key examples. It is not segregated service provision for a specific type or severity of disability. It's not a program to change people based on incentives, rewards, or ability to fit in, to be plugged into an existing service program or situation or housing setting. It's not a service type with eligibility and discharge criteria. Instead, it's fluid based on that person's needs and wants. Also, supported living is not a residential setting in which others dictate all facets of an individual's life based on what others think is best. And supported living is not designed to downsize, economize, or diminish disability service over time. So let's see how supported living might play out for a young man here in Illinois by the name of Nathan, who is in search for his own life journey. Let me tell you a little bit about Nathan. Nathan starts every day at 5 a.m. with music from the 1980s, his favorite genre of music, and he plays it at very loud levels. His go-to song is Jessie's Girl by Rick Springfield, if any of you are familiar with that. He also likes to drive his golf cart around the property where he lives. He uses public transportation on his own to get to a job. He also likes to help with cooking and other household chores. Nathan happens to work 2 part-time jobs in the community. One of his jobs is at his church where he attends with friends. Nathan is 28 years old and he still lives with his parents, but he also has a personal assistant on weekdays while his parents are at work. So here are some pictures of Nathan and the things he enjoys doing. You will see Nathan here driving a golf cart. You will see him getting off of the bus, the public transportation. Of course, here's the album cover of Rick Springfield, his go-to musician. You also have a picture of Nathan cooking on his stove, and Nathan at his job at his church, and I think that's the largest vacuum cleaner I've ever seen. And here's Nathan doing some laundry, putting clothing into a washing machine. And what the pictures do not show is that Nathan does require supports to do most of these things, including things he enjoys. In fact, Nathan does have some gaps in service provision and supports. He needs 24-hour supervision and assistance. And he only gets about 30 hours a week of assistance from a personal assistant. His parents, they're getting older, they provide overnight and weekend support, but in Illinois, the primary way to get 24-hour service supports for someone with an intellectual or developmental disability is either in a congregate residential setting called a CILA, Community Integrated Living Arrangement, which usually houses more than 3 individuals, or an ICFDD, which stands for Intermediate Care Facility for People with Developmental Disabilities, which typically houses 16 individuals or more. So as you think about Nathan's life, we have another poll for you. Which of these things that Nathan loves to do would he have to give up in order to get 24-hour supports in an existing Illinois residential setting, either because the regulations won't allow for it or because it just would not be possible or practical in a congregate setting? And there's several options listed here: driving his golf cart, having a job in the community, using public transportation, going to his own church, and even on church mission trips, and of course, blasting 1980s music at 5 a.m. And Christine, can people click on as many things as they want?
Absolutely. So the poll should be up on the screen and you can click on as many choices as you like. So again, this is an opportunity to speak up and speak out, indicating which of these do you think that Nathan would have to give up if he were going to live in a residential setting, either because the rules and regulations say can't do it or it just isn't possible. So it looks like folks are considering the options and the choices, and they are voting. So again, you can click as many choices as resonate with you. All right. We're going to give folks a couple more seconds to go ahead and vote. The majority of you have voted. Thank you very much for speaking up and speaking out. All right, let's see. I'm going to go ahead and close the poll, and then we are going to share what you said. All right, it looks like 82% of you thought, okay, he may have to give up driving his golf cart around. 32% thought, I may have to give up cooking and doing chores. 42% thought, might have to give up using transportation. About half of you thought that maybe he'd have to give up going to his own church and on mission trips, and Wow, a lot of you thought that blasting 1980s music isn't going to happen at 5 a.m.
I think that's very telling and pretty accurate as to how I would expect things to play out. I do think it would be difficult for Nathan to drive a golf cart on the grounds of an ICFDD. He might be able to have a job in the community if he lived in Acilla, as long as everything fell into place, job coach, transportation, and he might be able to use transportation at both settings, but there might be some issues. He might have to have a staff person accompany him because of regulations. The church and mission trips, again, there might be an issue with SILA funding if he was gone for a certain period of time. And that music thing at 5 a.m., he might even get in trouble for doing that. But if Nathan had supported living, it would allow him to continue to live the life he currently enjoys. It would provide him with a life experience very similar to that of his peers. It would continue to allow him to have inclusive community opportunities and continue to foster relationships, independence, choice, the life he wants. And most importantly, it would keep that 1980s music mojo intact. So full disclosure here, Nathan's last name is Parks, and he is my son. And he has worked very hard to create a life for himself that he enjoys based on his choices, his preferences. As his parent, I want to continue to see him enjoy his life, to have an arrangement that will sustain him beyond my existence. So where does Illinois stand in all of this? Well, let's first look at what other states are doing, and many other states support the concept of supported living. In fact, some of these states, such as California, Florida, Washington, and Oregon, all have supported living legislation. Other states, however, have just adopted this practice as their public policy. So what about Illinois? Well, here's a picture of this great state of Illinois, and there's a person standing there scratching his or her head with a question mark above the head. And the fact is that supported living is not a viable option in Illinois. In fact, it's one of only 6 states in the country where it is not an option. And here you see an outline of the state with a big red X through it, and the person continuing to scratch his or her head with a question mark above it. So what can we do about this? How can we change things? How can we make this an option in Illinois? I think, first of all, persons with disabilities need to speak up and speak out about what they want in terms of residential living, supported living, and why it can be important to you. And individuals can speak to their parents, to their family, friends, staff of an agency that might provide services, a case manager who would set up those services, and state agencies, including the Department of Human Services, Division of Developmental Disabilities, which funds the existing option of SILA services. And also, persons with disabilities and their family can talk to legislators. You can also learn more about your rights and empower yourself and others to exercise those rights. And people with disabilities need to recognize they are an expert in their own lives and recognize that others are experts of their own lives. I would encourage persons with disabilities to participate on committees, work group, task force if they're asked, and to help and develop and share information about supported living to others. You're welcome to pass along this PowerPoint to anyone, including your family, your case manager, agencies, and legislators. We need to let people know about this potential service option for people in Illinois. So at the beginning of the webinar, I asked you to keep in mind the word possibilities. And if you could choose what you would want in a dream home, what would that be? And if you're not a person with a disability, what would you want for that person with a disability you might support? And I believe, again, you can choose as many options as you want. Would you want that house or home to be close to family? Would you want to be able to have a pet? Would the house or home need to be close to transportation? Would it be important for you to make your own rules? And what about choosing your own staff? What would be a dream home for you?
All right. Well, this is your final opportunity to speak up and speak out by voting in a poll. You are invited to select as many or as few as you like. So again, what would you want in a dream home? Do you want it to be close to family? Maybe, maybe not. Would you like to be able to have a pet? Be close to transportation? To make your own rules? Or to choose your staff? And again, as Teresa said, if you are a self-advocate, a person with a disability, answer this for yourself. If you are a family member or an ally, answer it on behalf of the person that you support. And if you don't know what somebody wants, here's a great opportunity to have a conversation and find out. So we'll leave this open just a few more seconds. It really looks like a big percentage. I'm going to go ahead and close this and share the results. Many of you say living close to family. A really fair number say being able to have a pet, safety, being able to live in a safe environment is very important. A lot of people thought that making my own rules is very important, and 95% choose my staff. Wonderful.
Thank you all very much. As we start to wind down and look at opening this up for questions, there are a few things that I would like for you to remember. And there's a slide here with a yellow Post-it note with the word remember written on it in black ink. And the first thing I want you to remember is that people have the right to real community inclusion. And that's grounded in legislation such as the Americans with Disabilities Act, as I referenced earlier. People with intellectual and developmental disabilities want choices regarding where they live and with whom they live. And they should be included in decisions about their homes, as we just saw in this most recent study completed by the ARC. Also, for future planning in our state, we need to make it possible for people to live as independently as possible in accessible, affordable settings and balance independence, respect, choice, and safety. There should also be an easier means to help persons find information about housing, maybe a website. And self-advocates need to educate others, including their families, agencies, and legislators about what they want in their lives, including where they want to live. Before I open it for questions, I do want to point to the last few slides on this PowerPoint, which includes resource information where I gathered much of the information contained in this PowerPoint. If you want to learn more about what supported living is and what other states are doing, and also my contact information if you would like to follow up with any questions or concerns or comments.
All right.
Christine, I turn it back to you.
All right. On the screen, I'm just visually showing the resources slides that you mentioned. There are several slides of resources, actually 3 slides with resources. And then Teresa did mention that there is here showing on the screen a link to a webinar recording that's about supportive housing. And I'm now going to go back to the questions, comments, and contributions. And we've had a couple that have come in throughout the our time together. All right, so let's see. Here's a question. Can you please repeat the fact you just stated? How many, well, the number of states considering supportive living to be a viable option?
Well, we know that Illinois is one of 6 states that does not offer it as an option. So that means that, 44 other states have it in some form or fashion. But the states that have it more actively, you see some states have it more focused and used more often than other states. I would say that if you wanted to look at a state and some examples, California has the most online information available about supported living. But some of the other states also had, Florida does as well, and Washington and Oregon. The ones that have legislation tend to have more available information about how they've implemented supported living. I would also say that I was part of a group that went to the state of Missouri to look at supported living there, and they have some good examples. And then the state of Wisconsin, particularly in the Madison area, there is an organization called Options that actively uses supported living. They have a little over 100 clients in the city of Madison who are all supported using supported living. They all live in the community. They live in apartments or houses or condos, and supports come to them. And that was the example I was referencing for people who might have more significant needs and might need even two 24-hour support persons staying with the individual. So that would be another good example to look at, Options in Madison, Wisconsin.
All right, thank you. And here is a, excuse me, a consideration. It comes from Kish Pisani, who is the Executive Director of Illinois Microboards and Cooperatives. Kish says, is it possible to call attention to the ARC of Illinois Lifespan webinar from last week, where it goes into greater details on circles of support and relationship, microboards and cooperatives to formalize supported living and solutions until, of course, there is a real service option available in Illinois. And I would say yes, go to the ARC of Illinois' website and check out the Lifespan webinar from last week to learn more. And Kish also,
and if I,
oh, go ahead, please.
Oh, I would just add to that. I think Kish makes an excellent point about the circles of support, and that is certainly part of the situation we have for my son, Nathan. He has a large network of supports, very informal, and they fill in some of those time frames beyond our availability and beyond the hours paid for. And the circle of support is just an additional network that helps Nathan engage with the community at large. And the microboard concept, if you're not familiar with it, I strongly encourage you to check out the Illinois Association of Microboard website as a resource.
All right. And also from Kish, she said that there are some examples of microboards making this work, but it needs to be an option for everyone in Illinois. Also,
absolutely.
Yeah, here's another question. I'm wondering, by chance, do you use those survey results as data for you to use in your advocacy efforts?
I think that's a great idea. And I don't know about this Self-Alliance, but I think that would be a great idea to take to legislators to show the interest.
Yes. And we have another question. Why does Illinois say no to supported living?
You know, I think that's a great question, and I'm not sure. I think the funding mechanisms are pretty complex, but I also think that we have spent a lot of time and money into our existing structure. The SILAs and disability service providers were encouraged and funded to build these group homes and settings, and it's hard to look beyond that. I think that's one of the barriers. We also have to look at the funding and budget mechanism. I think that is a concern, and the ratio of funding spent on more institutionalized care compared to the more home-based kinds of services and supports. My son gets 30 hours a week, and that's certainly not enough to take care of his total needs, while some people, might get more if they live in these particular types of facilities. And so there's some disparity there based on the choice of living in a home and community versus moving into more of the group home and institutionalized setting.
All right. Another question. If the fair tax doesn't pass, how will we pay for this option?
I don't know enough to comment on the fair tax, but I would say that, we as advocates and family members need to continue to put forth our interest in this housing option. And quite honestly, I think it's much more economical when you look at the cost of support of providing a personal assistant compared to a more structured setting. It's much more expensive to house someone in a group home or an institution than it is to support someone in the community. So it's a much more economical offering for our state.
All right. Another question. Are you aware of how new the Wisconsin policy is?
I am not entirely sure, but I believe the options program has been around for quite a few years. I want to say at least since the 90s, maybe even before that, maybe in the 80s. Now, I don't know if they were providing supported living that entire time, but they've been around for a while. And all of their folks live in supported living arrangements, all the folks that they serve.
All right.
And some people just receive a few hours of services per week. And as I said, some people receive 24-hour double staff support.
Great. Let's see. When you mention other states have supported living, is it because of the amount of waiver funding?
I think the waiver and how it's written in some states is different than the way it's written in Illinois. One of the things that we looked at when we went to the state of Missouri to check out supported living there, we actually looked at Missouri's waiver, and there is just some differences in the way that they pursued their waiver funding. So that's certainly something Illinois needs to take a look at, how they word their waiver. Do they need to make changes to that? Do they need to incorporate language more consistent to what other states have put into play? So I certainly think that that's an area that we need to ask our state legislators, our state agencies about.
All right. Terry says, can you put up the slide resources number 2 again, please? And Terry, I think we will get to it. If we don't get to show it for a longer period of time, please know that you can download the PowerPoint presentation as a handout. Plus, it will be emailed to all participants, and then you can check that out a little bit closer. And she also said, thanks, this was great. All right, another question. This is a good one. Does this mean only the supported services would be public funded? Could a family choose the home and have funding for the purchase?
What we saw in Missouri is that services were separate from the funding for the home. So there would be funding supports to help someone find an affordable home, maybe through public housing resources. And that's another thing that we may need to see here in Illinois, is to have some kind of resource that people can go to find affordable housing. And I don't know in other states how much of the funding goes to the purchase of a home, but it's hard to understand exactly how that whole housing scenario works, but there are supports, and I believe that there are programs that can help people purchase their own homes. But we need a resource here in Illinois that people can go to look up and find what those supports are. What are some ways to get affordable housing, subsidized housing, and perhaps mechanisms to fund a house if that's what the person wants.
All right. Another question. Would this be housing that already exists? If not, who would be developing and paying for this housing?
What I've seen in other states is that they've used a combination of things. For the most part, I think most of the housing options were already in existence, and they just sought and found the funding to support that house as a place for a person with disabilities to live. But yes, funding for the housing is really a key piece to making this work.
All right. I do want to share a contribution that came in. Where did it go? All right. And this comes from Alan Bergman, and he says, Options in Community Living has been in operation providing supported living since 1985. In California today, 53% of adults living out of their family home receiving waiver services live with supported living, and only 300 people live in state-operated developmental centers in a state with 40 million population. So I just wanted to offer some background information up. Here's another question. Do we have any idea how other states are funding supported living? And I know you touched on that a bit.
Well, again, through a Medicaid waiver specific to supported living. And I also understand from Wisconsin that they use kind of a combination of funding supports, but it's all public funding. Managed care, I understand that Wisconsin uses some managed care, and I believe that some county funding sometimes comes into play.
All right. Here's a great question. What is Governor Pritzker's stance on this? Is he aware of the need?
I do not know, but I definitely know that the Department of Human Services, the Division of Developmental Disabilities, is aware of this. I had the wonderful opportunity to give a similar presentation to that division and the division staff a few weeks ago, and I must say they were very receptive. And I specifically asked if they would consider, either funding a pilot project along those lines, or maybe creating a task force that would be inclusive of persons with disabilities and their family members to look at making this a viable option for persons with disabilities here in Illinois.
Wonderful. Here is a great contribution from Brian, who's a self-advocate. Brian shared that supportive housing is the same in Missouri as it is in California, and he learned this while at the Missouri State Capitol.
Great.
All right. Here's a question and a statement. There is such a shortage of DSPs, which stand for Direct Support Professionals and Nurses. Would that be a hindrance?
I think that's a good question. But if we look at those informal supports that people have, the circles of support, and the option that is sometimes used in supported living of paying those family supports, those friends, those neighbors, I think that maybe that would help absorb some of the challenges that we experience in finding DSPs.
All right. Here's another contribution. Federal law has allowed states to use Medicaid HCBS waiver funds, home and community-based services waiver funds for supported living since 1995, which is 25 years ago. So federal law does allow states to use it. And here's something else. When we talked about what can you do, here's a good consideration. Please talk to your legislators about tax incentives for nonprofit builders. If the state matches the federal tax credits, it would help to spur the building. Call your legislators.
Some great contributions.
Yeah.
And comments. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for those.
Yeah, legislative advocacy. Here is another question. What is our governor, Governor Pritzker, doing to help adults and children with intellectual disabilities?
I do know that he has a person on his staff who is overseeing all the health and human service agencies, and those agencies come together and they're reviewing priorities and issues of needs and trying to work together, collaborate on behalf of all people in Illinois who have needs, but including people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. I know that the Department of Human Services is heavily involved in those efforts, those collaborations, and I think that the time has come to pursue it further by self-advocates and keep reminding the governor and his staff that we're out here and we have some unaddressed needs.
All right, just a few more questions. The first is, do you see supported housing as a feasible option for individuals with significant medical and physical disabilities?
I think it can be based on what I heard from the options program in Wisconsin. They do have people with more significant needs, medical needs that they are caring for. And as I mentioned, they had funding. They were able to secure funding to double staff, 24-hour double staff supports for those individuals. And there's only a few in their program that has those significant needs. So it's balanced out by, people who have fewer needs, but it is possible, as we've seen in Wisconsin.
All right. And the final, can you clarify again the difference between supported living and supportive housing?
I'm not sure I feel comfortable in clarifying supportive housing, but supported living is where people live regardless of their disability type, their needs. They live wherever they want in their apartments, their own home, even their family home if that's what they choose, but the supports come to them. They're not in any kind of congregate setting. They're not housed in an apartment building that includes mostly people with disabilities, but they live in whatever setting that they want. That's how I am just defining supported living. Supportive living, I have heard, and this may or may not be accurate, that it's more of a congregate, maybe an apartment building where people have their own apartments, but it has more of a congregate kind of arrangement.
All right, thank you. And thank you all for kindly sharing your questions, comments, and considerations. As Teresa said, she used several resources to create this presentation, and those are listed on this resources one. Resources 2 and resources 3 slides. Again, back in 2016, the Alliance did a webinar called Supportive Housing, Opportunities, Freedom, Choices, and you can view that webinar recording at the link listed. And if you would like to contact the presenter, Teresa Parks, again, is the Deputy Director of Programs, the Human Rights Authority Director for the Illinois Guardianship and Advocacy Commission. Her office is located in Peoria. Her phone number and email are listed. And from the Alliance, if you wish to email us, you can do so at info@selfadvocacyalliance.org. You can check out our website with lots of resources, including recorded webinars. Check us out at selfadvocacyalliance.org. And if you are a Facebook user, you can find us and like us. Just search for Illinois Self-Advocacy Alliance. And the image on the screen is a person with pink skin, short brown hair, raising right hand in fist. The person is wearing a purple shirt with the words, "Ask me about the Alliance," written in white. And on behalf of the Illinois Self-Advocacy Alliance, the Illinois Council on Developmental Disabilities, and Teresa Parks, our wonderful presenter, thank you so much for joining us today and learning a bit more about supported living. Thanks all. Bye-bye.
Thank you.